What we're told is to avoid ultraviolet light because it causes skin cancer. Yet what we notice is that people with skin cancers, both non-melanoma and melanoma skin cancers, are associated with low vitamin D.
To have the biggest impact on our circadian rhythm, when do you think would be the ideal times if you were going to look at minimums to try to get out into the sun so that you can have the best overall outcomes?
The sunrise is the most important time.
Does the food we eat impact the sun we get more, or does the sun we get impact the food we eat more?
I would say the latter.
You can't out diet a poor light environment.
You can eat the highest quality grass-fed steak, but if you're doing it at 3 a.m., all those organs like the liver, the pancreas, the muscle, they all have these circadian clocks, so they can all be disturbed by the blue light, by the eating late at night.
All right, we have Dr. Max Gulhane on the show today. Really happy to have you on the show. I've been following your podcast, and you've been enlightening, to say the least, because of the research and stuff that you're doing on cold therapy, light, and all these various things. Kind of a question to sort of kick things off a bit is, like, it seems like the body can really adapt to a lot of things. And there's some people that do spend a lot of time inside, and there's some people that are seemingly like quote unquote fine. And there's people that are like kind of doubters of some of this stuff about how clean our water has to be, how particular it has to be, how particular our light and dark cycles and so forth need to be. And we hear a lot of gurus and stuff like that saying that we need cold exposure and that we need sunlight and that we need darkness. And obviously this is something that you're communicating to people a lot. You're a practicing physician. You see a lot of people. You are a doctor. And so I'm sure that you're probably using a combination of some of the things you're learning about these light and dark cycles, along with probably some conventional medicine interventions here and there. What do you think the truth of this is, and how concerned should people be about kind of, I guess, locking in like a more natural, more primal circadian rhythm?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mark. And look, I think what is normal has become so skewed in today's world that what people might be kind of, they might turn off a light here and there, or they might try wearing some glasses and blocking a bit of blue light here and there and maybe not notice too much of a difference. But I think that what we're accepting in terms of our modern light environment has drifted so far away from what was normal in our ancestral past that I think for a large proportion of people that they haven't been necessarily adherent enough, I think, to everything that they really need to, if the goal is to really respect our circadian biology. And that is, and people would be surprised, just given how ubiquitous artificial lighting is in modern society, how difficult it truly is to respect a circadian light and dark cycle. And for some context, if your listeners aren't aware, this idea of this circadian rhythm is an inbuilt timing mechanism of our body to basically run the show according to a clock. And the clock is taking inputs from light, and the day, a bright day and essentially a dark night, or a night that only had a bit of moonlight. And that was the norm. That was the norm for this ancestral past of well before we were even existing as primates, as mammals, all the way back until single cellular organisms show these responses to light and night and dark cycles. But what we did is, when we lit up the night with these artificial, with the power grid, with first the incandescent bulbs, and now we're hurtling towards a completely LED blue lit world, is that we really messed that system up. And now it's incredibly difficult to get into an environment where you have a completely dark night, unless you're going camping in Wyoming. I mean, it's easier in Australia, but that's the degree to which, and with obviously devices like our iPhones, our iPads, it's very difficult to get true darkness. And then you add on the fact that people are inside in an environment that contains glass that blocks the full spectrum of sunlight, then you've really got a kind of very, very distorted impression or environment. And so I think that the importance of getting all these things is underlined or is emphasized when people actually manage to go, say, camping for 6 days, and they're truly getting up with the sunrise, going to sleep with the sunset, outdoors all day, and that's when I, in my experience, have seen people really make massive improvements because they've been able to go the whole hog, so to speak.
If you can just give some of us a rundown on the way that light affects sleep, because like as you're talking about it, some people might be like, well, it's not that important. I'm sleeping already and I watch TV at night, etc. So what are the ways that your light environment can be affecting your sleep negatively or positively?
Yeah, it's a great question. And fundamentally, sleep and the state of sleep is what the most important of these circadian the manifestations of our circadian rhythm. And this idea that when it's darkness, we should be resting and recovering and repairing on a very fundamental level, all the way down to the mitochondria. So what the body has done is as humans is we have these receptors and we have these light sensitive proteins, and they actually exist all throughout the body. Most significantly, they're in the eye, in the retina, and a certain amount of cells called these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. They don't form images in the way that rods and cones do. So one way I've explained it in the past is to think about your eyes not only as a camera function that is able to form images. So I can see Mark, I can see him holding his big stainless steel growler, but it's also a detector, and it also, almost like a motion detector, has certain cells that sense the presence and absence of not motion but of blue wavelength light. And that, if we think about the visible spectrum, blue has this peak. It's around 480 nanometers for this specific light detector, and it's essentially sky blue. It's the blue of the middle day, and those cells and these retinal ganglion cells, they sense the presence or absence of this blue light, and they send that signal all the way to the brain, to the special part of the brain, this hypothalamus, which is running the clock. It's like the Swiss clock at the top of the town hall. It's the master clock, and that clock is programming all the other clocks in the body to make sure almost every single process in the body is happening according to this 24-hour rhythm. The reason why this is relevant to sleep is because we are supposed to have bright light during the day, and when we expose ourselves to this bright blue light during the night, that's essentially confusing your body. It's telling you, hey, it's midday. It's a noon midday. At an equatorial latitude, when your body's supposed to be going to sleep and kicking off repair mechanisms that help us deal with things like cancerous cells before they become problematic. So this is fundamentally a light. It's a confusing light signal, and it distorts this melatonin, which is a hormone that gets regulated very closely with cortisol to, again, influence our wakefulness and activity and sleep. And essentially what you're doing when you're looking at the iPad late at night with this blue light is you're turning off your secretion of melatonin, and that melatonin normally helps you fall asleep, it keeps you asleep, and it also triggers all these repair mechanisms. So that's fundamentally what's happening on a hormonal level when we look at the iPad.
You did mention cancer, and there's some doctors that believe that you can basically get a lot of people in remission from cancer from like a ketogenic style diet. We're also seeing that there's research showing that a lot of people that have skin cancer, which we kind of thought came from the sun. Maybe the sun can trigger it. Maybe you can explain it better. But a lot of these people have a lack of vitamin D. And so that kind of is interesting because you're like, well, if they had if they were overly exposed to the sun, then they would probably have higher vitamin D levels, right?
It's a very good question. I'm glad you brought it up, Mark. So the paradox, or it's a supposed paradox, but really the thing that needs to be explained by these centralized narratives about the causation or the why we get skin cancer. This is the fundamental thing that needs to be broken down. What we're told is to avoid ultraviolet light because it causes skin cancer. Yet what we notice is that people with skin cancers, and the most to to really briefly break the types of skin cancers down, is that there's these melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancers. The non-melanoma ones are basal cell and squamous cell carcinomas, and these are typically what people get in sun-exposed areas, say on faces, on the neck, on shoulders, back of the neck. And you get them when you're 60, 70, 80, in those sun-exposed areas. And they are quite easily removed. They're cut out and have a relatively, squamous cell more than basal cell, relatively low risk of metastasis or spread. So much so that many cancer registries don't even take records on the incidences of BCC, particularly and SCC. So that we can put that aside. The most scary skin cancer and most potentially skin cancer with the most mortality is melanoma, and there's cutaneous, meaning skin melanoma. There's non-cutaneous melanoma, things like uveal melanoma. But let's focus on the cutaneous melanoma. They can metastasize, and metastatic melanoma is a very, very ugly disease. The commonality that you alluded to is that all of these skin cancers, both non-melanoma and melanoma skin cancers, are associated with low vitamin D. So if and vitamin D, we generate vitamin D on exposure to ultraviolet B light around 290 to 315, 320 nanometer light. So if the sun were the chief causative factor, or the completely a necessary cause, then why are people who are getting skin cancers vitamin D deficient? Why do they have a deficiency of vitamin D if that is what they need to generate the vitamin D? So the answer is, or the resolution is, that it's a complex problem, and there's multiple things going on here. But having a high vitamin D by slow chronic exposure to UVB light is protective of not only skin cancer development, but all kinds of other internal cancers. And the reason for that, and I listened to your excellent discussion with David Herrera, and you touched on this topic in that discussion too. The reason for that is there's vitamin D and non-vitamin D reasons, but vitamin D is has an anti-cancer effect. It has a profound anti-proliferative effect on cells, and it's been investigated, isolated compound of activated vitamin D you put on skin, put it in cell culture, and it stops cancers growing. Like that's how powerful this compound is. So when we've cultivated that skin, that so-called solar callus, which is this idea of a gradual progressive exposure to full spectrum sunlight to build that vitamin D, we are protected against the development of skin cancer. So the answer, therefore, is that there's something else that these people are doing that are getting skin cancer that isn't going out into full spectrum sunlight and building their solar callus gently.
So then what is the reason that people link getting too much sunlight to getting skin cancer? Because you still see people that, they mention use sunscreen, don't get too much sun exposure, or you could get skin cancer.
Yeah, and I really want to add the nuance here, because ultraviolet light does cause DNA damage in skin cells, and that is a critical point to understand. So ultraviolet A causes reactive oxygen species that can damage DNA. Ultraviolet B can cause direct damage. It's ionizing radiation, so it can cause DNA strand breaks and then therefore cause mutations. So what we have to think, we have to hold two beliefs in our mind, that both, yes, that UV light can cause mutations in skin cells, but we also, on the other hand, have to believe and understand that UV light is a critical hormetic stressor for our body that we need, not only to generate vitamin D, but to generate all forms of other essential compounds for health. So much so that one of the compounds that we make from ultraviolet B light is beta endorphin, and that is essentially an opioid chemical. So nature's made us to be addicted to ultraviolet light, even though it's causing these can cause mutations in the skin cells. Thankfully, the body has evolved a whole range of mechanisms to deal with that background of carcinogenic or cancer-causing, mutation-causing effects of ultraviolet light. And one of the most elegant ones is the fact that your skin is like bark, and the cells essentially, as they develop, they come and they mature and they essentially die. So the top layer of your epidermis is actually dead keratinocytes. And what they do is they can absorb ultraviolet light significantly, and they're simply dead, and they continue to slough off. So just think about if you've got a skin cell that's accumulated a mutation, you know that with enough time and correct light-dark cycles, which regulate the turnover of these cells appropriately, because your skin as well has a circadian clock, that if there's a mutated, like a bad apple, essentially just gets shed like bark. So that's just one of the mechanisms that the body has come up with to deal with ultraviolet B light, which we evolved under. And that's, again, just one, but things like melanin and the amount of melanin that we have in our skin is another critical defense mechanism. And that's kind of a nuanced topic, but essentially the amount of melanin that we have in our skin is ancestrally a function of how much ultraviolet light was in our environment. And if we're from an equatorial area or an area of incredibly high ultraviolet light, say indigenous Australians, equatorial Africa, then that amount of melanin in the epidermis is enormous, so much so that it protects the cells from this ionizing ultraviolet B radiation, but it also reduces our ability to generate vitamin D. The last point I'll make briefly is that we've known for a very long time. There's about 6 studies since the first one was actually around World War II. This couple of researchers of US Navy sailors noted that they were getting skin cancers at quite a high, relatively higher rate. I believe it was 6-fold greater. I'm not sure exactly who their control group, their comparator group was, but they noted that their rates of internal cancers, so colon cancer, or prostate cancer, all these other more cancers that have a higher mortality rate, was significantly lower, and their mortality was significantly lower. So this was just repeated, and there was another study in the 1945. Frank Appley, MD, he plotted the solar radiation in US states and noted their cancer mortality. And the more solar radiation, the lower the cancer mortality. So that was again, another associational study. And then we fast forward to basically 2015, the most landmark study that I think every one of your listeners who want to understand sunlight the best and its role in health was called the melanoma in southern Sweden study. And briefly, what happened is these researchers noted that women in Sweden, and they were native Swedish. This was before widespread changes in the demographics of that country. They noticed that these women would go tan. They would lie in tanning beds. They would go overseas to tan. And what they wanted to know is, well, their hypothesis was that these women are going to be dying of melanoma at a higher rate. So they followed them. They enrolled all these middle-aged women. They asked them those 4 questions: do you tan in the summer? Do you tan in the winter? Do you visit tanning beds? And do you travel overseas to tan or to get sun? And then they followed them for 25 years. And what they expected, as I mentioned, is that these women would be dying of melanoma, and it would it would confirm the biases that or the presupposition that the sun was harmful. What they noticed was that the women who had the most sun, who answered 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 4 of all those questions about sun-seeking behavior and ultraviolet exposure, they had the lowest mortality, and there was a dose response. So the women with the intermediate sun exposures had died at a faster rate, and those who avoided the sun, those women who were like, nope, going nowhere near the sun, they died the fastest. And that's a profound finding. And they actually calculated that the magnitude of that difference was equivalent to smoking, such that you had a woman who avoided the sun but didn't smoke had the same mortality as the women who went sunbathing regularly and smoked cigarettes. So this and Pelly Lindquist and his team were shocked because that was exactly the opposite of their original hypothesis. Yet it confirmed what Peller and Stevenson found in the early 30s, what Apley found in 45, and Garland found reduced colon cancer with increased solar exposure. So it's and the most recent confirmation of this finding is Richard Weller's analysis of the UK Biobank, again showing the more UV light you get, the lower all-cause mortality, which is medical speak for death by any cause, the lower cardiovascular mortality, so death by any cardiovascular cause, and the kicker out of Weller's analysis was the lowest skin cancer mortality. So even those who got skin cancer but had more UV light, they lived longer. So this is the picture, the holistic picture of sunlight and health, which is, yes, you might slightly increase your risk of skin cancer, but the trade-offs or the benefits that you're getting in all-cause mortality and reduced other forms of nasty cancers is enormous.
And I think some of the idea here is just to try to be reasonable with all this stuff. And, if it's, the sun's blazing out there and it's a really hot day and the UV index is through the roof and you're super pale, then you have to be cautious with how long you're in the sun for. And if you have children, there might be reason for you to make sure they have particular clothing to protect them. I would choose that over sunscreen, but there might be cases like for my kids. I remember when they were really young, they would be in the water, in the ocean or whatever for hours on end, hours and hours and hours. And we had to reapply stuff to them because at that time I certainly didn't have some of this same knowledge, but with a kid that's 4, I'm not going to be like, oh, we got to get you tiny exposure here to the sun and try to figure all these things out when the weather's super nice and it's time to go to the beach. You just want to, have the easy access to go to the beach. So you have to kind of treat these things case by case and do what you think is reasonable. But as an adult, you can feel the sun. You feel the sun. You're like, oh, I don't know if this is so good. You'll start to feel ill sometimes. You'll start to just not feel well. And you're like, I should go sit in some shade. So you naturally just go, sit under a tree or something like that. So I think just kind of trying to apply some logic to it, being very cautious that you're not just going to, go out in the middle of August and go to a concert and just be pounded by the sun and end up with blisters and all that kind of stuff.
Exactly. That is exactly my message, which is we have to respect our skin type. So there's a Fitzpatrick scale of basically the amount of melanin that you have in your epidermis and your propensity to burn, and it goes from 1, the most pale Northern European, to 6, the most dark, maybe Somalian or South Sudanese, and these are different phototypes, and we have to respect our individual phototype and the amount of UV light in our environment, and that those two factors are going to be the most important to considering how to get sun exposure in a safe and appropriate way, and how to build this solar callus, as you said, Mark, in a way that is sensible. It doesn't make sense because you can just compare yourselves. If you're living maybe and lots of us are living in countries that are different to where our ancestors grew up, you just have to compare yourself to the skin color of the people that were traditionally from that land. If it's different, then there's a mismatch here. There's a mismatch between your skin type, your and the latitude that you're living in. So respecting that difference is key. And this concept is I've called it a skin type latitude mismatch. It's important because there's actually 2 types of mismatch. So if you're Swedish living in Sweden, or if you're Indian living in India, then you're not mismatched. You're obviously in the same area that your parents and grandparents and ancestors evolved. So it's less difficult. This formulation needs less explanation because you're in your native land, so to speak. But if you are a lighter guy, say you, Mark, living in California, perhaps you have less melanin in your epidermis than the native people. So what that means is that you just have to be careful, and you actually there's more UV light around than your skin can protect you from. So it's actually pretty simple. You just have to use the shade, and you just have to avoid peak UV times and titrate your UV exposure to that skin type and to those feelings that you mentioned. The opposite is actually more difficult to get around, and that is when you have a very dark, like a type 5 or type 6, you're Nigerian or West African, and you're living in London, UK, or Scotland, UK, or Tasmania, Australia. And this is a big problem, because the amount of UV light in the environment, both during the summer and during the winter, is insufficient to generate enough vitamin D for optimal health. And I'm not talking about to prevent bone disease, and yes, there's enough to prevent frank rickets, but I'm talking about health optimization, which is the observational data that people seem to have much less cancer, cardiovascular disease, all these other autoimmune disease when you essentially climb above a threshold. So this is much more difficult to achieve if you are, as I mentioned, a Brit who is of West African origin, because there's not enough UV light. So the answer there is that you could be naked in summer and you're still not generating enough, because your melanin is soaking up all that UVB light and not allowing you to enough to generate vitamin D. So the solution for these people is actually it's more complicated, but it involves firstly relocation. Obviously that's hard, but things like traveling during seasonally to get some more sunlight, and other kind of workarounds like that.
What you got, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm curious. Hopefully I can word this correctly without stumbling over my words. But thinking about which one impacts the other more, does the food we eat impact the sun we get more, or does the sun we get impact the food we eat more?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say the latter. I think the sun that we get is going to influence the food, the suitability of the food that you should eat, and that is going to have a bigger impact on health. The food that you eat is going to affect your photosensitivity, and we know that because many people who might listen to this have tried cutting out seed oils, and suddenly they found that their ability to sunburn has reduced. So we know that food consumption, particularly the omega-3 and to omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids and their proportions, really do influence photosensitivity and predisposition to sunburn. So that's definitely a thing. But the opposite, side of the coin is that if we're eating a diet that is incongruent with our light environment, that's when the metabolic syndrome, obesity, fatty liver, and all these other problems really take off. And that gets to this idea of seasonal eating and the attempt to eat what's locally available as much as possible. And so much of the food side of the obesity epidemic and what's going on in our countries from a chronic disease point of view is people eating processed food and food from elsewhere, and that's not respecting their light environment.
You're probably wondering, why am I wearing these glasses? Well, it's because I'm being bathed in blue light. And blue light isn't necessarily bad. There's blue light in the sun. But if you're in your office, if you're indoors, if you're in front of a screen during the daytime, it's not a great idea to have your eyes being bathed by blue light all day long. That's why EMR Tech, a company that we've partnered with, has blue light daytime glasses and blue light blocking evening glasses. These glasses right here are meant for you to wear during the daytime when you're in front of screens, etc. But if you're outside, take the glasses off and get the natural sunlight. And if you're at home in the evening when sun sets and you need to be in front of the TV or you need to be in front of your computer or on your phone, these glasses are the ones to get. They also have the best red light therapy devices on the market. If you stand in front of any of EMR Tech's red light therapy devices, you will actually feel how much stronger the output of the red light is on those devices versus any of the competitors. They also have some of their smaller red light devices like their Fire Wave, Fire Dragon, and Fire Storm. And then if you want to get some of their bigger panels, they have their Fire Hawk, which is their biggest panel, and the Inferno panel. These are literally the best red light therapy devices on the market. And if you want to save on them, Andrew, how can they do that?
Yes, you got to head over to emrtech.com. That's EMR-tech.com. EMRTech.com. And at checkout, enter promo code Power Project to save 20% off your entire order. Again, that's EMRTech.com, promo code Power Project. Links in the description as well as the podcast show notes.
You mentioned you can't out diet a poor light environment. Can you expand on that more? It's a pretty profound statement, I think.
It speaks to this focus in the holistic health world on diet, on food, and particularly in the low carb and carnivore type space, where they have made amazing gains and helped lots of people, and it's a very effective intervention to lose weight and get rid of insulin resistance and reverse diabetes. But there's an associated myopia or tunnel vision in my mind that diet is the only thing that matters, and these other environmental inputs like light and temperature are kind of peripheral and they're not as important. But they are in my mind. And when you go drill down to the mitochondrial level and start really understanding what are the inputs into these engines that make the energy in the cell, and you understand the importance of those light dark cycles, then it's really becomes quite apparent that you can eat the highest quality grass-fed steak from a regenerative farmer, from Will Harris at White Oak Pastures, or a dozen oysters every day. But if you're doing it at 3 a.m. In the nighttime, and because you work shift work, and you keep doing that for 5 years, 10 years, you can't escape that reality that those, I would argue, even more fundamental inputs into health and mitochondrial health are basically perturbed and suboptimal. So it's an invitation for people to think about light when it comes to health and health optimization.
And it seems like the light can just drive you towards bad behavior, because if you're going to eat something at 3 a.m., it's certainly not going to be oysters.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. And we talked about this offline, and I think you're so right, Mark, which is that it's a constellation of poor lifestyle habits, and people are getting home and it's late at night, and they're either they order the takeaway or the Uber Eats, and it's seed oil drenched processed foods and with sugar added, and they're giving themselves the blue light input right in front of their eye at 11 p.m. So, they're really stacking these suboptimal inputs at the same time.
You mentioned temperature for a second there. So what were you referring to? So
it not only so your body's collecting information, and that's one way of thinking about it. Is that your body through its circadian system, through these non-visual photoreceptors, are constantly bringing in information from the environment, and it's using that information to help time all these bodily processes. And temperature is one of those inputs. They're known as Zeitgebers or timekeepers, and obviously light is the main Zeitgeber for the circadian rhythm, but temperature is also a function. And an idea or how to illustrate that is that cold, particularly, can have profound effects on physiology, mitochondrial function, mitochondrial efficiency, and therefore things like metabolic health. And there are studies showing, I believe it was in somewhere in Northern Europe, they just got a bunch of diabetics and they told them to eat whatever you've been eating. Don't change what you're eating, but simply walk around. They were in some cold city. Maybe it was in Latvia or something like that. Just walk around in a t-shirt and shorts instead of your normal North Face puffer jacket. And they showed profound improvements in their insulin resistance, in their fasting blood glucose, and other markers of metabolic health. And simply by inducing essentially a cold thermogenesis, or this cold temperature input. And what it did, I mean, there's many different mechanisms how these things are happening, but one of them is to upregulate the production of brown adipose tissue, which is rather like, if you imagine white adipose tissue as a storage bin for energy, the brown adipose tissue is like a furnace, and it's simply just sucks in glucose and other energy substrates and burns it for heat. and this is what their bodies were doing. So the temperature is fundamentally influencing our metabolism. And when, just like I mentioned earlier, that we're living in these hermetically sealed houses that are temperature, not only are they blocking natural sunlight from entering and artificially manipulating the spectrum of sunlight, but blocking UV, blocking infrared, and therefore proportionally allowing more blue light in. So back to the blue light story, is that you're actually getting essentially relatively blue light toxic by being behind a standard glass that is probably mandated by energy saving guidelines, government regulations these days, because you're blocking those other balancing wavelengths. But not only that, is that everyone's offices, everyone's houses are also temperature controlled. So if your body is expecting to go into winter and the season is winter, it's New York and it's December, but you're 24 degrees Celsius indoors the whole time, then there's this discrepancy. Again, it's like a mismatch, and that has profoundly chaotic effects on metabolism and mitochondrial function and the way that your body's dealing with energy.
So it seems like there's so many things that can impact your metabolism and your mitochondria. And so if someone comes to you and they have really poor, A1C and glucose, and maybe they're pre-diabetic or maybe they're diabetic, it sounds like there's a lot of strategies that you can employ that could be really helpful. Obviously, again, there might be pharmaceutical intervention. If someone comes to you and their blood sugar is like 500, they're going to probably need like medical assistance. They're going to probably need medical help right at that moment. But it sounds to me like a lot of what you're describing, that the sunlight could be effective, some type of cold therapy. When you think cold therapy, all we think is cold plunge, but there's a lot of therapies that you could utilize that would probably give you the cold exposure that could actually make a difference. Really just getting yourself chilly kind of and getting some goosebumps is probably sufficient enough to do that for a couple of minutes. What are some of these habits that someone can kind of stack? My mother-in-law has had diabetes for maybe 10, 15 years. She really just struggles with like nailing the diet down exactly the way that she needs to. She just kind of likes her snacks. She likes to keep those in there, and she balances everything out with some metformin. But her blood sugar is starting to creep back up, and I've had success with her, helping her with lifting and walking, and then also like carnivore diet. But she really has a trouble like adhering to it. So maybe for someone like that, like what are a couple things that she could do that could also assist in kind of regulating her blood sugar?
Yeah, you're exactly right, Mark. She's
almost, she doesn't care anymore. I mean,
yeah.
She's doing her best. You know what I mean? She's doing the best she can, but she still just likes her little treats here and there.
The fundamental thing is always how interested someone is in changing, because that's going to be the key differentiator is in terms of these options, these lifestyle options, because you have to want to implement them. But it's a great way of conceptualizing it as you did, Mark, which is I sometimes think of it like a tool bench, and you've got different size spanners and you've got different size pliers, and each one of them is good for a different purpose. You can shift spanner where you can change the size of the spanner, but they're all different options, and just like you said, there's medications too. So there's this like a spectrum of diet and lifestyle and pharmaceutical drugs that we can use as holistic doctors. And I guess the skill is to understand the patient, understand, say, your mother-in-law, understand where she's at, what she's willing to change, and then choose the right tool for the job. So you mentioned exercise. That's great, very, very effective, especially walking pre and post meal. And we talked about cold exposure briefly, and as you said, you don't need to strip down naked and hop into the local river in the middle of winter to get a benefit. You can simply just wear less clothing and start building tolerance to natural cold. And it's actually surprising how quickly people find that they're no longer disturbed by the cold temperatures and how they can simply deal with it. So exercise cold, fasting, extremely powerful. I know that you've been delving into intermittent fasting a lot lately. So fasting is a great way to kick yourself into ketogenic metabolism and start it's real rehabilitation for the mitochondria. Ketogenic diet that a lot of people have talked about. Again, it's a real mainstay of metabolic lifestyle medicine, is to get people into nutritional ketosis and start helping them access that fat burning mode. It's like a gear of the car. Sometimes I call it. It's like, imagine if someone's only been stuck in, first or second gear in the gearbox, and when you unlock nutritional ketosis for them, you're really just like opening up fourth, fifth, sixth gear that they forgot they had. Very, very powerful. And then you've got light, like we said, sunlight is so important, and it's having effects both from a circadian rhythm point of view and from a direct sunlight point of view. And from a circadian rhythm point of view, if you eat during the daytime, if you have good quality, high quality sleep, then that is going to improve your insulin sensitivity and make you more leptin sensitive, so that your body knows exactly how much energy is on board. And all those organs, like the liver, the pancreas, the muscle, skeletal muscle, the adipose tissue, they all have these circadian clocks in them too. So they can all be disturbed by the blue light, by the eating late at night, and so forth. But then you've got this direct daytime effects of full spectrum sunlight. And one way that this was illustrated was a very small, very simple randomized trial which just took two groups, and they didn't use sunlight. They actually used 670 nanometer red light. So pure isolated red light. And for half of them, they shone this 6-7 nanometer light on a patch on their back for 15 minutes, and then gave them this, what we call a glucose tolerance test. So in medicine, we make people drink 75 grams of glucose and then take blood tests, 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours, and we measure the shape of the response in the form of the how high did their blood glucose climb, how high did their insulin level climb, and that the shape of that curve gives us a lot of very useful information about their metabolic health. What they noticed, these investigators, is that the people that had that red light shone on their back for 15 minutes, they had significantly lower blood glucose levels after this challenge, showing that and the mitochondria were more active. They measured expired CO2, so they could put it down to, they could see that it was because the mitochondria are being upregulated. So what we can extrapolate from that is that the sun has not only 6-7 nanometer light, but all these other frequencies and wavelengths that have amazingly synergistic, beneficial effects on our health. So getting out in morning sunlight, that could be highly effective for your mother-in-law, and to simply have some bare skin exposed and do that for 15 minutes. And so those are kind of the main things. There's other things that can help. Things like grounding is, I believe there's some evidence for that. Things like going even more obscure, but there's a bit of evidence about deuterium depleted water. So, but there's a whole. Those are the tools, I guess, in the toolkit from a natural health or lifestyle point of view.
I want to ask this, going back to the morning sunlight. A lot of people have jobs where they have to be in an office from 9 to 5, and then they may have to do something after that in another building, et cetera, right? So to have the biggest impact on our circadian rhythm and our circadian biology, when do you think would be the ideal times, if you were going to look at minimums, to try to get out into the sun so that you can have the best sleep and just the best overall outcomes?
So, I mean, the sunrise is the most important time of the circadian day. That light, and getting that light into your eye, and ideally on your skin as well, is the highest value. Obviously, not depending on the time of year, the season, where you're living, your routine, people can't always see it, but that is the biggest bang for the buck in terms of programming this massive array of important bodily functions.
I just want to interrupt for a second and just say that I've noticed for myself that if I just wake up earlier, like if my sleep is all messed up and I wake up earlier and I actually see the sunrise, which is kind of a pain in the neck sometimes because it just is earlier and earlier, the deeper you get into the summer, that it really helps set up the rest of my sleep. Yeah.
And there's mechanisms by that in terms of your the programming of melatonin and the melatonin release later that night is really set up by that early morning sun exposure. I think, or I like to tell my members of my patients, try and wear, if you can, see the sunrise wearing as little clothing as possible. And the reason for that is not only are you obviously at the sunrise, you're getting that light information into your eye, but you're potentially getting that on as much skin as possible. And then you're also getting the ambient temperature signals from wherever you are in the world. And that is, again, informing the body of your seasonal rhythm. It's not only about a 24-hour rhythm, but there's also these seasonal rhythms that we need to respect if we're living at higher latitudes. Because remember, if you live in the equator, if you live then the day length is equal. The temperature is stable. The light dark cycles are stable. So it's much easier to respect your body's circadian rhythm if you're living at the equator. And that's the value of relocation for people who are really sick. Because if you want to stick to the letter of the law to your circadian biology, but you live in Scotland or Iceland, then you're going to be up 18 hours a day during summer, and you're going to be, in a cave, so to speak, for most of winter. And that's difficult to really be adherent from a lifestyle point of view. So
let me ask you one more thing on this. How would you say that sunset, because I know sunrise, biggest bang for your buck, but would sunset also have an effect on helping you to wind down? Anecdotally, I'll say that that's actually been a benefit for me. So I try to get up minimum sunrise and sunset. But what would you say to that?
I would say 100%. So a brief recap of the type of light that we get in the morning. It's predominantly red and infrared light with a little bit of blue. And then as the sun rises over the horizon, and again, the angle of the sun is going to depend on your season and which hemisphere you're in. You get arrival of ultraviolet A light, and then you get arrival of ultraviolet B light at the same time as having the red, infrared, and blue. And then that process reverses itself over the afternoon and nighttime and evening. So evening and the sunset is a massive amount of red, massive amount of infrared, and some blue and other visible light. But it is incredibly powerful for putting people to sleep. I call it nature's Valium, because every time I'm really adherent and watch the sunrise, watch the sunset, you're out like a light. And especially if you're wearing blue light blockers, you put your orange blockers straight after you see the sunset, and you've already eaten your meal maybe an hour before. You're ready to be tucked in and go to sleep. So it's highly effective.
So these are incredible habits for us to have, but if somebody's listening, they might be thinking, well, I get on my phone right before bed and I can pass out right away. And I'm definitely one of those people. And if it wasn't for my kids, I would have all of the worst habits. And sometimes when you put it into, that context about, well, these little ones are going to mimic everything you do. So when it comes to this artificial light and some of these bad habits, how have you seen or have you researched in regards to like how blue light impacts young children?
Yeah, so children are very much susceptible to the effects of artificial light, and there's a number of reasons for that, and related to essentially their developmental stage and other kind of anatomical features. But the problem to think of, another way of thinking about it, is that they're getting these type of exposures at a much younger age than, say, Andrew, you or I, and obviously a lot younger than Mark. And we kind of dealt with the blue light and these other inputs much later, and we weren't being exposed during these critical formative times of our life. So yeah, it's incredibly damaging. So the effects could be obviously poor sleep, so with the attendant difficulties on attention during the day, so potentially contributing things like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, or other kinds of exacerbating things like other neurodevelopmental issues like autism. And because when you couple that with, remember, circadian biology is this coupled light, it's the light cycle and the dark cycle. If you're exposed to this blue light during the night as a kid because you're on the iPad, and then you go to school and you're not getting natural sunlight with its infrared spectrum of nutrients, but you're under these compact fluorescent lamps, you're kind of making the problem even worse. So behavioral issues, myopia. I mean, myopia is at epidemic proportions in East Asia.
Can you explain myopia real quick, just for people that don't know the term?
So it's a refractory error. It's to do with the shape of the eye, in terms of and the way the eye concentrates light to perceive images. And if we have been indoors all day, we live an indoor lifestyle, if we on screens all day, then the shape of the eye and the way that it projects light is essentially wrong or incorrect. Therefore, and then we have to wear eyeglasses to correct it. But that sets us up for a whole host of other issues, and it's a really not a good position to be in. But what we do know is that seeing morning red and rich light is highly effective in improving myopia. So it is a classic disease of this indoor civilized world and artificial light environment. And if you simply put the kid or the adult back into nature, depending on how long it's been, then there is a degree of reversibility and definitely prevention of worsening of it. So these are just some of the consequences for kids. And I mean, we haven't even talked about what they might be looking at, and I guess that's a complete separate topic that's not even related to circadian biology. But they're all it's like a wagon wheel, and they're all coming off this modern technological environment that we're living in.
Seems like one of the things I really liked about your podcast is that you talk about EMF that we have naturally. We have non-native EMF. We got these electromagnetic fields that could be harmful. We got electromagnetic fields that can be helpful. Kind of depends on how we utilize them. It sounds like you're a proponent of utilizing the sun. It sounds like you're a proponent of utilizing some red light. It sounds like you're a proponent of blocking the blue light whenever possible. And we all understand, or maybe people listening maybe don't understand, is that obviously there's blue light during the day when you're outside, but doesn't seem to have the same harmful impact as watching TV or looking at your phone, because you're mainly only absorbing that blue light. When you're outside during the day, there's multiple spectrums of light. But I think that we can get real crazy with some of this stuff, and we can burn down the 5G tower that's out in front of our house. But what have you really seen? In your practice, have you advocated for someone like, hey, you said your diabetes, sparked up over the last 2 years, and there is a 5G tower across the way, or there's a cell tower, whatever you want to, non-native EMF is there to mess with somebody, or their phone is in their room or something like that. Have you seen really profound things, or is this more of like a subtle thing over time and talking about all the disciplines that we're talking about here today?
Yeah, it's very difficult to tease out these individual the individual variables, especially if you've got someone who's interested, bought in, and they make a bunch of changes. I think, there is some evidence, and I believe it was in vitro, so lab-based evidence showing that some non-native cell phone radiation, 4G, was induced like oxidative stress in beta cells of the pancreas, so the cells that make insulin. So it's difficult to again elucidate the contribution of these of 5G or Wi-Fi to diabetes specifically, but I think there's enough circumstantial evidence that we can infer that it's having quite a negative effect on things like metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. I think the biggest probably benefit that I've seen in clinical practice is simply people just turning off their Wi-Fi router, because before we even go to sources outside our house, the biggest bang for the buck on the non-native EMF side of things is to really just go through your own house with a fine-tooth comb, and unplugging the Wi-Fi router at night is the biggest kind of value play. And people just report they sleep a lot better. That's probably the most consistent finding.
And when it comes to red light therapy, there's a lot of brands and stuff like that out there. But do you have any particular brands, or like what should people look for, like the strength of the red light, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, it's one that I use, I guess, judiciously, because I don't want people to think that they can replicate this, the giant orb in the sky with just this little panel, because they can't. But if they're in the correct situation and depending on what we're using it for, it definitely does have a place. I think. I really like what Andrew Latour is doing with Gemba Red. There's a US based company. Just because he's a very, very transparent guy. He's got a great amount of educational resources about red light therapy on his website and his YouTube. I don't have any affiliation at all, but the kind of field is a little bit of a shark pool because it seems like you can just call up a Chinese factory and brand a device, and you don't know what are the specifications, what are the manufacturer reported versus the actual real world tested specifications to do with wavelength, to do with intensity, to do with all these kind of things. And it's quite convenient for these manufacturers to be kind of a bit opaque and not completely transparent about what they are doing. But Martech, Gemba Red are two reputable brands that make high quality equipment that are transparent about third party testing. So they're two options.
What are some things that you've seen with cold therapy? Like, what are some things you've seen be able to help people? Because Jack Cruz, talking about how a lot of people evolved through cold and some other people evolved through the sun. I think it's like a really super interesting way to look at some of that. But what are some things you've seen with cold therapy?
I mean, my focus has mainly been on metabolic disease and obesity, this type of thing, and it helps. It does help in terms of improving those those markers that you talked about earlier, like HbA1c and fasting insulin, and it seems to really be effective in kind of getting rid of this ectopic fat or visceral fat. And I know you talked to my good friend Dr. Sean O'Mara recently, and his emphasis is very much on strategies that are specifically targeting visceral fat, and I agree with him on almost everything. But the cold therapy specifically seems to be quite effective at really getting rid of that and improving things like non-alcoholic, what's called metabolic associated fatty liver disease now, like the liver enzymes and these other types of the other types of things.
There's no shame in wanting to have great sex, and there's no shame for wanting your member to perform the way it should be. A lot of us sometimes have some issue with blood flow, but that's where Joy Mode comes in. Let me read you these ingredients because it's not going to be very long. Vitamin C, L-citrulline, arginine nitrate, and Panax ginseng. The cool thing about the ingredients in this is that they're all natural and that they're going to help you increase your blood flow, not just everywhere. So you could use this as a pre-workout. You will increase blood flow when it counts to where you need it. So if you know you're going to have a good time a little bit later, 60 minutes beforehand, put some Joy Mode in some water, drink it. And then when it comes time to perform, and you know what I mean by perform, you're going to be ready because you're going to be flowing. Joy Mode's going to help you do that. Andrew, how can they get it?
Yes, that's over at usejoymode.com/powerproject. And at checkout, enter promo code POWERPROJECT to save 20% off your entire order. Again, usejoymode.com/powerproject, promo code POWERPROJECT, links in the description as well as the podcast show notes. Thinking about somebody potentially even hearing about this stuff for the first time ever, although it has been extremely popular in recent years, but what do you think is, I'm going to say, the lowest hanging fruit, or I guess the most relatable issue that artificial light brings that will really start to like open people's eyes? Because if I explain this stuff to my dad, who's 70 years old, he's not going to change anything. He's going to watch TV throughout the entire night. He's kind of he's already gone through it. But somebody my age, I'm about to be 40, so I'm right at that age group that didn't quite grow up with all the technology, but as I grew up, it started coming out. and now it's really, really good. And so because I didn't really see the drawbacks the way you explained it earlier in the podcast, I might be thinking it's totally fine for my kids to have it. It's totally fine for me to have it now. What do you think is kind of like the thing that breaks the ice for people when it comes to artificial light, for them to wake up and be like, oh no, I actually can no longer ignore this. I need to address this because of this reason?
I would say the most people suffering from obesity, just being overweight, I would say, look, it's your light environment is making you fat. I think if that, and specifically talking to the problem that people care about the most, if it's a guy, as you said, 40, and he's starting to get the dad bod, and he's getting pudgy and he enjoys his diet, he's not necessarily eating that, what he might feel is that unhealthy, then really being like, look, mate, your light environment is making you fat. This midday signal, this bright blue light, is tricking your body into essentially storing energy and really putting on weight. I mean, I also am really in favor of speaking to exactly the person in front of me. So if someone's, again, sleeping poorly, then it's like, dude, it's no wonder to me why you're sleeping so poorly, is because you're essentially killing your body's own melatonin production. Maybe he's taking melatonin from the pharmacy, and it's like, well, you can make it yourself, but the iPad at 11 p.m. is really stopping that. And then maybe they're obviously in the gym, they're trying to make gains, and sleep quality, as you would know, Mark, and all of you guys would know, is key for testosterone optimization, for muscle mass retention and growth. So that's a real topic that I think speaks to a lot of people. And then the ladies, like, there's evidence that the blue light, this isolated blue light, which is also known as high energy visible, induces wrinkling. Photo is essentially causing damage and aging people, contributing to things like melasma. So if they're more of a aesthetics or interested in aesthetics or beauty, then staring at this blue lit screen is going to be actually aging their face much quicker than it would otherwise, because there's no red and infrared. And we know that from, again, the medical literature, that red light, infrared light induces collagen production, induces elastin, all these, the fibroblasts, they make these compounds to make your skin look more young and more vibrant. And that's what we would have got, because in our ancestral past, we got all of those natural wavelengths of sunlight. We got the red, the infrared, all those UV containing the UV light that, again, causes that DNA damage. But then you got the red and the infrared that repairs all that hormetic stressor of UV light. So that's another kind of attack or way of thinking about it. And then obviously the children, and talking about those behavioral issues. So, I mean, there's just some of the strategies that I think, but people feel tired, people have brain fog, people have migraine. I mean, we haven't even talked about migraine and the fact that migraine is linked to this flicker effect that we get from LEDs and fluorescent bulbs. And you can improve migraine massively by just getting rid of those artificial lights. So I think there's so many, every facet of people's disease or ailment and general state of poor health today is going to be improved by fixing their light environment, by blocking blue light and getting sunlight. So I like to just take it back to or offer people, what would your great grandmother do, and what type of light did they live under? And when you put it simply like that, people are more like, oh, okay, yeah, of course she wasn't looking at an iPad, she was outdoors all day and then had darkness at night. So just offering that, and then making suggestions like you have, Mark, throughout the podcast, and just trying something or buying a pair of cool blue light blockers. These are all little entry points that people might find benefit in.
Let me ask you this, because I think we asked Jack Cruz a similar question. If you could rank these things on level of importance that you would say how important they are: community, that's first; sleep, exercise/movement, nutrition, and light. How would you rank those? I can repeat it if you need me to repeat anything.
I'm going to quickly community, food, light,
sleep. Yeah.
Sleep. What was the other one?
Exercise and movement.
Exercise. It's a difficult question because I think for each individual, they've gotten to the either state of good health or bad health, depending on a different combination of these factors. And I think the relative weight and importance for each individual, it does vary. So I'm kind of hesitant to paint it with a broad brush. I would put light at the top, given how critical circadian biology is to the organism function. It is that old. These light dark cycles predate the development of the gastrointestinal system that we have as humans. So I put light at the top. Sleep is half of light because a regulated circadian rhythm is that light and dark cycle. It's a yin and the yang. That's the way I think about it. So the yin and the yang has a perfectly symmetrical white, light, and dark. And you can't have a balanced yin and yang without the tail of the white perfectly syncing up with the head of the black. Like that's the symbol in Taoism. So I would put circadian biology and light and sleep first. I then put food and exercise. And look, I mean, not to diminish the role of community. I think it's critical, but probably in that order.
Yeah, food is a tough one to kind of figure out sometimes because, like, you know, on one side, you're like, well, food is just so simple. You just eat the natural foods that are here for us, and that should be that. But we see how complicated it can be for people, and I guess how difficult it can be for someone to navigate multiple days in a row where they're not over-consuming calories because they're highly palatable processed foods that are around.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And again, I think it also gets to Andrew's question about the children and the blue lights and the iPads. And so much of lifestyle change is contextual. I truly believe that this is all made incredibly easy or incredibly difficult depending on our context and our environment. So maybe I need to put community in a different, higher up, because look at the Amish, for example. All this comes effortless to them because their culture enables. They don't have, and I'm not advocating that everyone return to an Amish type lifestyle, but only to emphasize the point that if it's your culture to not, turn on bright blue LEDs every night, then it becomes much easier. And your community or your routine is to have to grow your own food and locally without pesticides and herbicides. Then it's again much easier. So I think that cultivating our environment is key, and part of Dr. Jack Kruse's message is relocation where appropriate. And his perspective, and I really share it as a doctor. It's actually our job to give you all the options, and even if it's as unpalatable to you as moving to the 13th north latitude where he lives, then you might not like that advice, but we at least have to tell you that is something that is in your best interest. So what that might look like for people is I don't know, move to a smaller country town where move a bit further away from the 5G tower, get closer to some local farms that sell out of their barn door to people. I think a lot of people might be more convinced that they're unable to change their environment than they truly are. I think, and all this processed food and all this these inputs that we're actually talking about avoiding, that keeps people in a powerless situation from a mental and emotional point of view. I think definitely, so that they feel like it's more difficult to change their environment than it perhaps might be, but really being conscious of, hang on, do I really need to be living in this place? Do I really need to live this lifestyle? If you can make the lifestyle a bit more easily accessible to everything we've talked about in terms of this ancestral living, then the job's made easier for you.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out, is the TV the problem? Is it somebody just watching television? Like that's their choice of entertainment, that they watch a lot of TV and they sit down, or is it the actual blue light? It's very difficult to sometimes sparse these things out, but it is clear that these things, just technology in general can kind of grab our attention. It could pull us away from being outdoors. it could pull us away from otherwise doing healthy things. And we're not really going to propose that everyone should be as weird as we are and take things to the level that we do. We actually just find them to be fun, and we find them to be interesting. And I think for all of us, we like doing, almost like experiments. Like, let me just see what this does. I heard 15 different people talking about, going on some walks. Maybe I should try it. I've heard, it's a good idea to get some morning sunlight. I heard Andrew Huberman talking about, seeing the sunrise. What's it hurt for me to wake up tomorrow morning and just check that out and sort of discover that for myself? I have kind of a fun and interesting and kind of a weird question for you. More recently, there was a post from a guy named Jeff Nippard, and he talked about the use of anabolic steroids, and he talked about a study that was done on people that have taken steroids. And basically, in this study, I don't really know the exact way that they came up with this, but it basically just showed that these people that utilized steroids became dumber.
Their brain was aging faster.
What's that?
Their brain was aging faster.
Their brain was aging faster. And I don't know what the measurable item was there, but when he mentioned that, I was like, oh, that kind of goes along with some other stuff I've heard from some other people talking about mitochondria and stuff. Do you have any explanation on why something like that might happen, why that could be possible?
The only frame of reference that I have would probably be a lot of what Jack Kruse has talked about, and his to kind of paraphrase his perspective on this is that there's our bodies have that we put our mitochondria in a certain number of organs that are critical for us to thrive, and that's our brain and our heart, and those organs reflect these characteristics of being human, which is incredibly intelligent, the most intelligent animal, and with this highly efficient cardiovascular system, and part of the reason why we live the age that we do. So, and this is in contrast to say the gorilla, which has a much smaller brain and has much larger skeletal muscle. So essentially muscle and it's therefore stronger. So what Kruse says is that there's this bioenergetic trade-off that's occurring in the body with regard to our energy production. And again, the mitochondria are there to help transform energy for us. So if there's like imagine there's a limited number of, M&Ms on the table, so to speak. And if you're taking a bunch of those M&Ms and putting them in the pile of muscles, of skeletal muscles, so biceps and all your physical strength type muscles, then you're essentially deducting potentially deducting this energy from those more energy demanding tissues like your brain, like your heart. So that is Dr. Kruse's kind of point about building muscle or hypertrophy as a longevity strategy, and he would say that it's not a effective longevity strategy if we have to care for our heart and our brain, which we need to live beyond 60. If we want to be vital and coherent and into our elderly age, and then we need to have a really functioning brain and heart. And if these gentlemen who were doing anabolic steroids for maybe decades on end, maybe they were stealing, so to speak, bioenergetically from their brain, and that was reflected in, I don't know, maybe cerebral atrophy on MRI or whatever that outcome was. That would be my thought. And again, that's really just filtered through Dr. Kruse's perspectives. It makes sense to me. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that.
What are your thoughts on muscle for longevity?
I'm very much in the camp of it's actually what we've discussed earlier, Mark. I think we really hashed that out on our early discussion, which is strength, effective strength that is functional. Because I've seen patients with fall and break hips. It's not a nice state to be in, and it's usually
kind of
a quick
strong over being jacked kind of thing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Being strong and functional over being jacked. Yeah.
All right, man. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. And we'll have to link up again because we recorded the greatest podcast of all time and it didn't work. The audio got messed up.
There was too much juicy stuff in there. They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want us to release that one. So yeah, 100%. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you everyone for having me on. And it was great to connect.
Oh, I forgot one more thing. You got to sell Andrew on. We got to get Andrew eating fish over here. So maybe you can tell him why he needs some DHA in his life.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think it's the key distinction between the carnivore crew and the maybe kind of the more quantum biological kind of approaches to lifestyle and health optimization. And basically the reason to include DHA or fresh seafood in the diet is because this compound, this polyunsaturated fatty acid DHA, is essentially what made us human. It from a cognitive point of view, and it was thought. And there's a gentleman that you might actually want to interview him. He's 95, world expert, Professor Michael Crawford from the UK. He is as sharp as a tack. If we're talking about health optimized into his old age, he is cognitively incredibly sharp, and he eats seafood 5 times a week. But essentially, his work, his anthropological and scientific work, has shown that without this DHA compound, we don't have the brain power that we wouldn't have had the brain power that we do as humans. So it's playing an indispensable role in brain health, but it's also it actually facilitates the skin's ability to harness energy. And we haven't talked a lot about it in this podcast about the role of the body as this bioenergetic kind of vehicle, but really it converts energy, light, into essentially electric current, and the
makes
more
you a
DHA
better solar panel. Maybe it makes you a solar panel type thing.
100%. So the more DHA that you can pack in your cell membranes, the better you can harness energy. And fundamentally, life is about energy, and because an optimal health is just the slowest form of dying, and that's the difference between a corpse and us is energy. So that's the role of DHA. I think it's underappreciated, and especially for pregnant women, especially if they're breastfeeding, especially for children, young children. It's just so important for brain growth. But building the solar callus and getting the sunlight, you want to be disrespecting those seed oils and getting a bunch of fresh seafood, because that will again help with your photosensitivity and reduce your likelihood of a risk of sunburn too.
Do you guys, this is for everybody, suggestions on what type of fish and from where? Because I mainly shop at Costco, and I see like they have a lot of salmon and stuff. It's all wrapped in some pretty thick plastic. And again, I don't even know how to cook that because it's not my jam. You gave me some Wild Planet mackerel, which was surprisingly, I enjoyed it. Okay. Like it wasn't like I took the first bite and I was like, oh, here we go. Put some salt on it. Okay. It's a little bit better. And then put some lemon juice on it. And then I was having a party. And then I was like, okay, this is actually like, I can have this again and not like have to like cringe and like, here we go.
Have you tried sardines?
No.
Wild Planet has sardines. They come in six canisters at Costco. Mm-hmm. Sardines and rice.
Oh, they have them at Costco?
Yeah.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oysters
sold.
Oysters are really high in DHA. They might be.
Those are kind of funny though, right?
They're a little weird. Yeah, a little weird. It kind of feels like you got tossed around in the ocean. That's kind of what it tastes like a little bit. But I dig it.
My entry point, my advice for people who don't like seafood are oysters Kilpatrick, which is essentially an oyster with barbecue sauce and bacon bits baked. So they taste. That's a great entry point into oysters, or a white fish that is kind of pan fried or baked with butter or ghee, and just make it really fresh and heaps of lemon juice and salt. Those are two. That's like my basic entry point. That's beginner level, and then more advanced but really delicious is ceviche. Or some of these other Peruvian preparations of fresh seafood, like tiradito. That's another one. These taste absolutely amazing. So it's essentially white fish that is marinated in a citrus or other form of a lemon, and it just gets mixed through, and it's it's fresh, so it's not cooked at all. It's simply just marinated. That's really good. Again, really bioavailable. Actually, octopus, barbecued octopus. There's a way of preparing it. You have to actually boil it first for about 45 minutes, and then you whack it on the barbecue. Really high protein. I don't know if you gentlemen have ever eaten octopus in your bodybuilding. You have, yeah. Raw might be a bit slimy
because I use it for like poke, so you can get it raw
and stuff.
It's like eating a power cord, though.
Yeah,
it's weird.
Yeah,
very weird.
And then all the way up, and then other middle range is like a baked whole fish. That's probably even beginner, but with the skin on. Costco, you can get wild caught, I believe, Alaskan salmon in filleted portions. That's fantastic. A really good option because you're avoiding the suboptimal conditions of farmed seafood. And then the advanced players is raw. So like raw oysters and raw the other forms of like wild caught raw seafood. Sashimi is in that camp. And probably at the top, and this is what I actually recommend if you partner is pregnant and you can afford it, because not everyone can, is something like a wild caught ocean trout roe, which is like the fish eggs, because they are so rich in DHA that it's incredible. And that's actually what the Inuit gave to their pregnant women. Like if you Western Price, who did some interesting work anthropologically, like looking at traditional people, he studied these people and their dietary habits, and all these societies had very, very defined and well thought out protocols for feeding their women around the time of preconception, during the pregnancy, and breastfeeding. And yeah, the Inuit basically prized this fish eggs. So
what about peanut butter pretzels?
Yeah, extremely rich in DHA.
There's I think there's DHA in lamb as well, right?
Correct.
I don't know if there is in like goat, because there could be like maybe goat milk or goat cheese. Might be some options for people. And then maybe, does raw milk have DHA in it? Do you know?
I don't believe it has. If it did, it would not be anywhere near on the scale of of seafood or of lamb meat. And then the next point that needs to be really emphasized, I don't know if you have vegetarian or vegan following, Mark, is that you can't get. It's not the same to get these the algal DHA of algal origin. And David explained that on his podcast to you guys, and it's to do with the conformation of some of the molecules. So you essentially need preformed DHA from animal sources, which is called SN2 position, if you want the maximum effect.
Where can people find you, Max?
So
where can they find out your podcast and stuff?
Yeah, so if I'm on Instagram, Dr_Max_Gulhane, and that's where I post lots of most of my stuff, and YouTube, same or Max Gulhane MD, and then I'm also hosting a Regenerate, is a holistic health summit that's kind of bringing together a lot of the type of topics that I have been talking about in this podcast and others, and in my interviews, which is circadian and quantum biology, regenerative farming, and ancestral diets. So that we're hosting a summit soon in Albury, New South Wales, and we post the videos online, the talks a lot online after that. But yeah, if you want to connect via Twitter too, similar handle. But yeah, those are the platforms where I'm on, and my podcast is called Regenerative Health Podcast, and it's on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube, obviously.
All right. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks very much.
If you guys enjoyed this podcast with Max Gulhane, check out this podcast with Anjan Kata. He's the CEO of Daylight Cone. He's made a tablet that emits no blue light. This is the best thing you could be using, and it's actually amazing for your kids. But great piece of tech, worth a check. Check it out. Worth a check. Check it out.